Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Crypt13 and in today's video we are going to be doing a Shenhe skills full breakdown. Shenhe is an Adeptus disciple. Although she is not an Adeptus herself, she is commonly mistaken for one, and having spent most of her time in isolation in the mountains, her icy exterior makes her as cool and distant as the Adepti themselves. So anyway, if you guys are interested in how Shenhe's kit works, then sit down, relax, strap in. We're gonna get into it. Let's go ahead and start with her role first. She is a cryo support character, and so this is literally the definition of a niche character. Just because I'm using the word niche does not necessarily mean that it's bad. It just means that she is designed to do this job and she is supposed to do it the best, being able to support cryo characters. Her role is to provide flat damage bonus, regular damage bonus, and also resistance shred for cryo characters. Next up are her stats. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. First off, her HP stat is about 12,993 at max level 90, which is nothing too low, but also nothing too high. Pretty middle of the pack and pretty average. Her attack stat is 304, which again is actually not low and also not super high, just totally average. Her defense is 830, which is actually quite high among other 5 stars. Most other 5 stars are below 800 defense, so she's kind of tanky, surprisingly. Like I said before, her attack is pretty average. It's not as high as DPS 5-star characters like Eula, Ganyu, and Diluc, but it's also not as low as dedicated support characters like Zhongli with 251, Venti with 263, or Jean with 239. However, given that Shenhe's whole shtick is to have as much attack as possible, it would have been great if she had the highest base attack in the game, but that's not the case. Shenhe's Ascension stat is more attack percentage. No other 5-star in the game gets this as their Ascension stat. This is mostly limited to 4-star characters. Most 5-star characters get crit. Of course, there are some obvious exceptions to this in order to increase the potency of their own damage output, but that's not how miHoYo is going for Shenhe's design. At Ascension 5, she gets a 21.6% attack buff. At Ascension 6, 28.8% attack buff. Compared to 4 stars, at Ascension 5 it's 18%, and at Ascension 6 it's 24%. So she has 3.6% better at Ascension 5 and 4.8% better at Ascension 6. Alright, now let's go ahead and move on to Shenhe's skills. First, starting with her normal and charged attacks, and there's really nothing special here. At level 8, you have a 436% total damage scaling, which is not particularly high. Nothing else really of note here. She does have a double hit on her 4th normal attack, which is pretty standard for most polearm characters. However, this does not look super promising to take advantage of Crescent Pike, as there are other polearm characters that have more multi-hits in their normal attack string. Now let's go ahead and move on to her E skill, and her E skill is a doozy. This one is very involved, so I'm going to try my best to break it down so that you can understand it as easily as possible. This move is called the Spring Spirit Summoning. This move has both a tap and a hold version that changes the effects and cooldown. So first off, with the press, she will deal cryo damage in a path in front of her, and based off of footage, generates about 2 particles. Her hold will deal AoE cryo damage, and from footage, generates about 3 cryo particles. Both of these versions are going to deal bonus damage based on Shenhe's current attack whenever normal, charged, plunging attacks, elemental skills, or elemental bursts deal cryo damage to enemies. Basically everything that a character can do to deal damage is going to get a boost as long as that damage is cryo. And since you must deal cryo damage, this means that this buff will not get wasted on shields, as this buff is limited. The description denotes damage dealt, so that means if you hit a shield, you will not consume this buff. Only if miHoYo's translation team is up to par. It is only going to trigger if you see a damage number pop up on your screen. So anyway, these effects will disappear when its duration is over or when all of its stacks are consumed. So how long does it last and how many stacks do we have? Well, if you press it, you will have 5 stacks with a 10-second duration, and if you hold it, you will have 7 stacks with a 15-second duration. Each stack again will be consumed whenever you deal cryo damage, and if that one instance of cryo damage hits multiple enemies, then you will also consume stacks based on the number of enemies that you hit. However, these stacks are also independent of one another, so each character that can deal cryo damage will have their own stacks and duration to use, including Shenhe herself. This whole damage bonus effect, this whole stack system, the name of this buff is dubbed the Icy Quill. So going forward, I will be calling it the Icy Quill buff or effect. Now in terms of damage, when you press this, the level 8 talent level of this skill will give you 222.72% scaling, and if you hold it, 302.08% scaling. So it's pretty high, but they do have pretty relatively long cooldowns. The damage bonus that you get at level 8 is 73.05% of your attack stat, and this damage bonus is going to be a flat damage bonus. We'll get into how much damage bonus a typical medium invested Shenhe can provide with this skill in the math section in a little bit. And if you don't know how flat damage bonus works, this is very similar to the likes of Zhongli's passive skill, or how Kokomi works, or even how Arataki Ito works. So if you understand how that flat damage bonus works, it's exactly the same here. Now there are a couple of very important questions that we have to ask about this elemental skill. That question is, will this ability snapshot Shenhe's attack at the moment of casting to provide its damage bonus? This is definitely one of the biggest questions, and I have my opinion on this, and the TLDR is, I don't think that this will snapshot. First, however, what is snapshotting? Just really quickly, this just means that any attack buffs that you get after casting your skill won't increase or decrease the damage bonus given. So for example, just make sure that you would get all of your attack buffs before casting the skill, for example a noblesse buff. So that way when you cast it, it actually includes the noblesse buff. If this ability snapshots, then the noblesse buffs aren't going to actually factor into the damage bonus given. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyway though, why I think this is not going to snapshot. So first off, we haven't seen the term current attack or any variation of this in older kits. So I think that the term current attack means that her ability will be dynamic and provide attack buffs based on her current attack, even if it is dynamically changing. So a little bit more evidence of this is because of her signature weapon, as it provides an attack percent buff after you cast your E skill, and then it ramps up. You get a buff every second up to 6 times, and this buff actually doubles when you're off the field. So it would be really weird and counterintuitive if it snapshotted her attack, since her signature weapon is made directly weaker if that would be the case. If her flat damage bonus was dynamic, you could cast your E skill, switch right away, and that flat damage bonus would steadily increase as her attack increases over those 6 seconds. But if her E skill just snapshotted, then this buff that you gain after 6 seconds literally would not matter. So those are two of the main reasons why I think this skill will not snapshot. If you guys are still with me, I know that this skill is definitely a complicated as hell skill, so I'm sure you guys have lots more questions. Leave them down below if by the end of the video, I still haven't answered them. So let me continue on trying to explain how this skill is going to work and an approach that we can take to think about how it's going to work. Hopefully this will make more sense on how the damage bonus will play into your team's damage. So even though on the surface, this skill has some pretty decent scaling, 200 and 300%, the true essence of the skill really does come from the Icy Quill effect. The power of Icy Quill is enhanced the more cryo characters you have on your team that can make use of the stacks, since she provides the buff to everyone on the team that can deal cryo damage. However, cryo characters aren't the only one that can deal cryo damage. Now, okay, you might be thinking, how is that possible? Well, let me tell you, animal characters that have the ability to absorb elements can also deal cryo damage. So, if MiHoYo's software engineers have their shit together, an animal character that absorbs cryo can trigger the effects of Icy Quill and gain that flat damage bonus. Animal characters with this ability are the Traveler, Sucrose, Sayu, Venti, and Kazuha. Jean and Xiao do not have the ability to absorb elements, so they cannot deal cryo damage. Now, elemental absorption is different from swirl, so don't get that confused. Cryo swirl damage will not get the Icy Quill effect. So an animal character with the ability to absorb cryo is definitely going to be very beneficial for Shenhe teams. Next, you can also think of the flat damage bonus as off-field damage. You can't see what I'm doing, but I am air quoting that. So although you might not actually see the damage pop up on your screen, the flat damage bonus is basically baked into the attack that deals the cryo damage. And so this Icy Quill flat damage bonus, instead of being scaled off of Shenhe's own cryo damage bonus and crit, it'll scale off of the character that triggers it. Flat damage bonus is a type of damage bonus that factors into the damage calculation formula such that is affected by damage bonus percent, enemy resistances, and crit. So if the Icy Quill triggers 7 times, you can think of it as dealing extra cryo damage off field 7 times. But again, instead of seeing it as a separate damage number, it's going to be part of the attack that dealt the cryo damage. This might make a little bit more sense when we jump into the math section, so if that's a little bit confusing still, don't worry. Hopefully it'll get cleared up later on. I think I mentioned it earlier, but I think it's important to mention it again, but it's the fact that her Icy Quill effect will also apply to herself, and her elemental burst is able to make use of it. So that's a pretty good way to segue into her elemental burst. The initial damage of this skill deals AoE cryo damage with a 161.28% damage scaling at level 8. So it's pretty low. It's lower than your E-skill damage. However, it then creates a field that decreases the cryo and physical res of enemies inside of it. It will also deal cryo damage periodically. At C0, it will trigger about 6 times, basically about once every 2 seconds. The res decrease here also scales with the talent level, so at talent level 8, you get a 13% res, and then caps out at 15% when you crown her. The periodic ice damage is scaled at 52.99% at level 8. Now, a couple of notes about this ice dot that we hope is true, but honestly this might just be hopium, is the fact that we hope that the internal cooldown does not follow the 2.5 second timer. We want to be able to apply consistent cryo to enemies. So, let's hope for a low internal cooldown, which would make her burst a very good source to apply constant cryo, which could open up more team viability for her. Fingers crossed there, but we'll just have to wait and see for that. This burst is also very expensive, 80 costs, with only a 12-second duration with 20 seconds of cooldown. So uptime on this field is not 100% unless backed with Constellation, and even then there's going to be a small gap. The size of the field is actually pretty decent. It's bigger than Rosaria's burst, and I would say roughly about the same size as Kazuha's burst. And like I said earlier, this burst allows Shenhe to use the buff from her own E-skill. She will easily consume all of her own stacks with the periodic cryo damage. She will consume 1 stack by casting the skill, and then the remaining 6 from each tick of cryo damage if you use the hold E skill. So it's pretty good that Shenhe has a way to use her own buffs without having to waste time or needing really to do anything fancy. It's just fire and forget. Now let's go ahead and move on to her passive skills. Her first passive skill is that she will gain 25% more rewards when dispatched for 20 hours in Liyue. This is a little bit different from Keqing and Chongyun's, who reduces the time it takes. This passive takes a different approach, requiring you to take 20 hours, but then you will gain 25% more rewards. Her next passive skill is that party members will gain a 15% crowd damage bonus while standing in the field of Shenhe's elemental burst. Very simple and very straightforward. Her next passive is that after using her E skill, if you press it, you will gain 15% extra elemental skill and elemental burst damage for 10 seconds. When held, you will gain 15% damage bonus to your normal, charged, and plunging attacks for 15 seconds. Given the cooldown of her skills, there's no way to have both buffs simultaneously. The press has a 10-second cooldown and the hold has a 15. So unless I'm missing something here, there's definitely no way to have both buffs going on at the same time. If I did miss something, someone please leave a comment down below. Alright, now let's go ahead and take a look at some beginner and preliminary builds for Shenhe. So in order to fully utilize Shenhe's Icy Quill effect, you want to increase her attack to as high as possible. So the first build is an attack percent support build. We build as much attack percent as possible to give the most flat damage bonus as possible. However, since Shenhe's burst is also incredibly expensive at 80 costs, we're going to need some energy recharge to be able to cast it within a reasonable rotation. So taking ER on either the weapon main stat or on your sans piece is probably an option you want to think about. This means that Shenhe will not be built like most typical characters where we go attack percent, damage bonus, and then crit. Instead, Shenhe will go triple attack with an energy recharge weapon, or energy recharge, attack with an attack percent weapon. As for her substats, you have a big focus on attack percent and energy recharge. We really want to try to get as much energy recharge as possible, maybe aim for about 140 to 160% in order to fuel that 80 cost burst. Depending on the team comp setup you're using, you can make your own judgment on how much energy recharge you want. With more cryo characters, you may not need as much, but with less, you may need more. In terms of artifact pieces, in order to get as much attack percent as possible, your best bet is to run a 2-piece Gladiator with a 2-piece Shiminawa set. Your other option is to run 2-piece Gladiator or 2-piece Shiminawa with a 2-piece Emblem of Severed Fate to get a little bit of extra energy recharge. The other build that you can go for, but is really not recommended, is to go for a main DPS or main carry build. And if you want to play her this way, all the power to you. And if you decide to go down this route, then build her in the typical fashion that you would any other character. Attack percent, cryo damage bonus, and crit. For your artifact setup, you can go with a 2-piece Gladiator, 2-piece Blizzard, 4-piece Blizzard. Any typical main carry or main DPS build will work here. Now let's very quickly go over her weapons. First off, her signature weapon. No questions about this. This weapon is amazing on her because it boasts a massive base attack stat, 741 when max leveled, and just gives you a buttload more of attack percent from the passive skill. For 4 stars, some other attack percent weapons you can go with are the Lithic Spear, the Wave Breaker's Fin, and the Royal Spear. For energy recharge weapons, you have the Favonius Lance, the Catch, and the Star Glitter. However, I would skip the Star Glitter since the passive skill on this is pretty much useless compared to your other free option, the Catch. And then in terms of 5 stars, she can use quite a few of them, as a lot of them provide either attack percentage or energy recharge, barring perhaps the Jade Spear and the Vortex Vanquisher, as it requires you to hit enemies with your attacks while you're on the field to gain those attack percent bonuses. However, if you don't mind doing those few attacks to gain those bonuses, then they can work. Skyward Spine is a very nice energy recharge weapon with a very high base attack. The Staff of Homa gives extra direct attack, however, fully utilizing it will require you to take some hits to go below 50%. The Engulfing Lightning gives both energy recharge and attack percent, so definitely a very good option there. In terms of team comps, Shenhe teams I think aren't as straightforward as they might seem. You definitely want cryo characters that can use all of the Icy Quill stacks reliably, and then also an animal character that has the ability to absorb elements. So going through the list of all of the cryo characters, we have Ayaka, who can easily proc all of the Icy Quills with her Elemental Burst. Ganyu, same thing, her Elemental Burst is going to eat up those Icy Quills pretty quickly. Now with Eula, she might be an issue, as she can only take 5 stacks with her typical burst combo against a single target enemy. A typical combo being E into Q into hold E, and that's only 5 instances of cryo damage. This, however, would only be a problem against single target enemies. Against multiple enemies, shouldn't be a problem consuming all of the stacks. Rosaria, E skill hits twice, and her burst will only tick 4 times, but another E skill right after will allow you to consume all stacks against a single target. Diona's E skill, when held, hits a lot of times, and her burst also procs a bunch. So Diona definitely has no problems consuming stacks. Chang Yun does a single strike with his E skill, and then his burst will summon down 3 blades for 3 instances of cryo damage, and then a 4th at C6. However, since he also infuses his normal attacks with cryo damage, there should be no problem using all of the stacks. However, this isn't all you want to think about when choosing a team member that can utilize her flat damage bonus from the Icy Quills. You also want to think about which of these characters has the most damage bonus, crit, and enemy shred in order to take advantage of that flat attack damage bonus better. Remember what I said earlier about flat damage is that damage bonus, resistance shred, and crit play a huge role in increasing your damage when it comes to flat damage bonuses. So I think that this is a very good segue to go ahead and go into the math section. Alright, so let's do a preliminary look at Shenhe's damage output, as well as take a look at how her flat damage bonus works on other characters. So first off, Shenhe's own damage output. So for these calculations, I decided to use a Shenhe that is running a typical triple attack build on the Sands, the Cup, and the Circlet, as well as a 2-piece Gladiator and a 2-piece Shiminawa set. And for these numbers, we are going to be looking at crit damage and then non-crit damage here on the bottom a little bit afterwards. Now, in terms of substats and crit value, I'm using 8 rolls of a 5.8% attack increase, 7 rolls of crit damage, and 7 rolls of crit rate. So this is probably what a decent amount of investment in your artifact pieces is going to look like. And then we're going to compare just 2 different weapons, a Favonius Lance and then her signature weapon, the Calamity Queller. Something to note here is that with a triple attack build and a Calamity Queller, you might be a little bit overloaded on attack and might be missing some energy recharge. So unless your substats are very much energy recharge focused, you might have some problems casting your burst here. So instead, maybe for the Calamity, we should run ER on this first attack piece instead of attack percent for the Calamity. Just for the sake of this, we're just going to be running triple attack. So just keep that in mind. Favonius Lance is not a bad choice for Shenhe as well because of the ER substat and the very high base attack as well. So taking a look at this damage, E skill tap, E skill hold, burst skill damage, the dot damage, and then also the damage with the quill. This is really what I want to highlight. So, you know, for her E skill, the damage is not amazing, but it's also not terrible. With a Favonius Lance, a crit with a tap is about 6k damage, and with the hold, you're dealing about 8.5k. And with your signature weapon, you're hitting almost 10k and about 12.5k on the hold. You know, it's just kind of average damage. It's nothing to jump out of your seat about, but it's also not so terribly low that it's unusable. So, you know, it's pretty decent. And then for the burst skill damage and the burst dot damage, with the Favonius Lance, the dot is only about 1508, which in my opinion is not that strong. This is actually kind of low. And the burst skill damage is even lower because the scaling on your burst is actually pretty low. It's lower than your E skill. Yeah, your elemental burst doesn't do a lot of damage. However, this does not include the icy quills. So we should definitely include the icy quills because Shenhe can use them, right? You're going to be using your E skill before your burst most of the time anyway, so you're going to have icy quill buffs. So when you include the icy quill buffs with the Favonius Lance, your flat damage bonus is going to be lower than the Calamity Queller, and we can definitely see this in the difference here. But, you know, for a dot to deal about 3,500 is also not super amazing. So, you know, you might be thinking that Shenhe's damage output is kind of looking not great right now, but, you know, we're not there yet. We haven't looked at her icy quills for teammates yet. So don't get too discouraged just yet. And then with the Calamity Queller, we're dealing about 5k per dot with an icy quill buff, and the burst skill damage hits at almost 10k. Now this column here denotes the damage difference between a burst skill damage and a dot with the flat attack bonus. So if I click on this here, all it does is that it subtracts these two numbers. So that means the difference here is the damage increase that we got with our flat damage bonus from the icy quills. So here with the Favonius Lance, it's about 2077 on the skill damage and the dot. It doesn't matter either or, it's always 2077. And then with the Calamity Queller, it's 3034 here and 3035 here. That 1 point of damage is probably just a rounding error. But yes, as you can see, the flat damage bonus is increasing our damage by about 2k with the Favonius and by about 3k with the Calamity Queller. So flat damage bonus is kind of a finicky thing. If I switch over to this page, the damage bonus that we get from a Calamity Queller is 3024. Our attack power reaches about 4k with my setup here, with a Calamity Queller with full buffs. So for those who don't know what the Calamity Queller does, this gives us a 12% elemental damage bonus. And then after using an E skill for 20 seconds, your attack is going to increase by 3.2% per second, up to a maximum of 6 times. So 3.2 multiplied by 6 is a 19.2% attack buff. However, when the character is not on the field, that attack increase is doubled. So that can go up to 38.4% attack bonus. So I'm doing a little bit of an underestimation here because I'm only doing the 19.2% attack buff instead of the 38.4, where in most situations, you won't be getting either of those because since this is a ramp up, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. As your other characters are consuming stacks, your Shenhe is going to be continually gaining attack power. So she's neither going to be at its lowest point or its highest point. It's going to be steadily increasing over time. However, if you do wait the full 6 seconds before consuming stacks with your other characters, then you can get the full flat damage buff. But you know, these things are really minute things, and all this will depend on how you work your rotations and stuff. So just to make things simple, I decided to go with just the lower bound and decide to just go with a flat 19.2% attack buff. So anyway, back to this flat damage thing. If we take 4140 and at level 8, we take 73.05% of our attack and turn that into flat damage bonus, we get 3024. However, when we looked at our damage difference here, we saw that the Calamity Queller was giving 3034. It's 10 damage more than the flat damage here. So why is that? That's because flat damage is also affected by crit, damage bonuses, and enemy resistances. So this flat damage can actually be lower or even higher if the characters that utilize this flat damage have enormous amounts of damage bonus or enormous amounts of crit. or if the enemy has very low resistance to cryo damage. If we take a look at the Favonius Lance, the damage difference was 2077. And if we calculate her attack power with the Favonius Lance, we reach about 3175, and then the Icy Quill damage bonus ends up being 2319. So 2319 is definitely lower than 2077 here. So even though this is flat damage bonus, you don't always get this flat damage bonus. I hope that made sense. Anyway, if we just take a look at the total damage now for Shenhe with the Quill buff, the Favonius Lance, we're dealing about 36,000, and with Shenhe, we're dealing about 53,697. So while Shenhe is off-field, her burst is going to tick for some damage. So this is the off-field damage that Shenhe would do that you would actually see on the screen popping up. So now let's take a look at the damage another cryo character will do when they have Shenhe's buff. And I'm going to be using Ganyu for these. I think that she is going to be able to illustrate this the best. So with these calculations, I decided to go with the Favonius Lance that gives a 2,319 flat damage bonus. My Ganyu has attack percent, cryo damage bonus, and a crit damage circlet. She has an Amos bow and is using the 4-piece Wanderer's Troop set. So extra charge attack damage from the artifact set and then also from Amos bow. Substats are a little bit similar, a little bit less than Shenhe though. I decided to go with just 5 rolls of attack percent, 5 rolls of crit damage, and 5 extra rolls of crit rate on the Ganyu. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the damage here without Shenhe and Shenhe. The top is with, the bottom is without. And you can definitely see that there is quite a big difference here. The Frostflake arrow deals 13,989, basically 14,000 without Shenhe, and then it goes up to 20,745 with Shenhe. The Bloom deals 23,780 without Shenhe and 30,500 with. Her E skill here, 9k and about 14k. Each icicle with Shenhe is dealing about 8,900 and without 4,700. So taking a look at the damage difference here on our Frostflake arrow and on our Bloom, 6,756 damage difference. The 1 point of damage here again is probably due to a rounding error. But here, right, you can definitely see that the difference here is way more than 2,319 flat damage bonus and is way more than we got with Shenhe. A lot more. And then when it comes to the E skill and the elemental burst, the difference is less. This is because we don't have as much damage bonus on our E skill and on our burst, right? The 4-piece Wanderer set is giving us 35% extra damage bonus on our charge attacks and also the Amos bow. Whereas with our E skill, we only get bonus from our cryo cup and from our elemental burst, giving us an extra 20% cryo damage for standing inside of it. And that's why our burst is the lowest, because this is only getting boosted by our cryo damage cup. So hopefully that illustrates how damage bonuses really factor into the difference that flat damage bonus makes. Also, even note that these calculations, I did not include the damage bonus from Shenhe's passive or the resistance shred, right? She provides 13% resistance shred as well as 30% extra cryo damage bonus from her passive skills. So this can actually go even further, as well as Shenhe's own damage as well. So there really is a lot of potential here for even more damage. So let's take a look at the total Icy Quill damage, right? This is what I meant by off-field damage. The difference here is basically the damage that the Icy Quill is doing, because this is the difference between without Shenhe and with Shenhe. So if your Icy Quills are being consumed by your arrows every time, then the total quill damage here is 47,292. I'd say that's pretty good. You combine this with the damage that she was dealing on her own, and since this is the Favonius Lance, 47k plus 36k up here, that's about 84 or 85,000 damage that Shenhe is providing for the team, which I think is not terrible. I don't think that's bad at all. And also considering that I did not include extra damage bonuses and resistance shred. However, with Ganyu, you're probably going to be using your burst, right? So that's probably where all of your Icy Quill stacks are going to go, and not really from your charged attacks. So if you take that into consideration, if we say that all of the damage and the quills come from your burst, all 7 of them, then the damage goes down to only 29k. So that's definitely a lot less than the 47k if we use it from our charged attacks, at least with this Wanderer's Troop build. and also with the Amos bow. So 29k plus 37k ends up being only about 66k damage. So definitely a lot less, but still, I don't think it's bad. Again, considering that I did not include the damage bonus and the resistance shred. Also, let's take a look here when you don't hit a crit, just to highlight that the damage difference is also a lot lower. So hitting those crits matters a lot when it comes to these flat damage bonuses. When you don't hit a crit, the Frostflake arrow now damage difference is only 2.4k. E-skill is 1600 and the burst is 1400. So a pretty big dip in damage if you don't actually hit the crit. Now you might be wondering why the damage difference is the same for the arrow and the bloom, but it's not the same for the E-skill and the burst. And I kind of alluded to it, I kind of talked about it, and this is because all of the extra damage bonuses on the Frostflake arrows and the Frostflake blooms versus the damage bonuses on our E-skill and burst. They're not the same. That's why there's a big difference. So I'll try to highlight that over here on this page. So there is a column here for the damage difference for either crit, average, or non-crit, and you'll notice that they are all different. And this is because, again, the damage bonus here is different, right? That is one of the only things that's different. The other thing that's different here is the skill percent damage. However, the skill percent damage does not affect the damage difference, right? Because our arrow has a 204% scaling and our bloom has a 348% scaling, but their damage difference is exactly the same. The only thing that makes a difference in increasing that flat damage difference is our damage bonus, res, and crit. So in order to illustrate that, I'll go ahead and change all of these damage bonuses. I'll just hard code them because right now they are calculated. I'll just hard code this all to 1.666. And now, as you can see over here in this column, the calculated damage difference is now 2,206 for every single thing that I changed to 1.66. Let's go ahead and change this last one as well, just to show that. There we go. It changed to 2,206. That's kind of weird, right? Math is kind of a very fickle thing, isn't it? We take a look at the formula for how this is calculated. We take our attack power, which for Ganyu here was 2345, our skill damage, we multiply those two things together first, and then we go ahead and add our flat damage. Our flat damage here was 3024. I decided to change it to 3024 here, but in our calculations it was 2319. And then we multiply the enemy level, the damage reduction, the damage bonus, and then the enemy resistance. So against a Hilichurl or something, their resistance is 10% to the elements, right? So it seems weird that adding this flat damage number would end up having the same damage difference here, even though we're adding it to a different number here, right? So 4,802 here for the arrow, and if we go down here, 8,164 for the Frostflake bloom, and then if we highlight this whole thing, this is 11188 multiplied by 0.48, multiplied by 2.376, multiplied by 0.9. Then over here, we have 7826 multiplied by 0.48 by 2.376 by 0.9, right? You would think that maybe this shouldn't be the same number, but math is math. And just to show that the formula is correct, this is the formula that comes from the Kaching mains. You know, these guys are very trustworthy, so their general formula for damage is going to be correct for sure. So our base damage is our talent times our attack plus flat damage bonus. That is Shenhe's flat damage bonus. We go ahead and plug this up here into the base damage, multiplied by the 1+ damage bonus and crit, enemy defense multiplier, and resistance, which is exactly what my formula did. So very interesting stuff, right? The more damage bonus that you have on the character that is utilizing the Icy Quill buff, then the greater the damage difference you're gonna see. So trying to pile on all that damage bonus and resistance and crit is gonna make it so that your Shenhe can deal really strong off-field damage, and I'm air quoting, but you can't see it. So anyway, I hope that this makes sense. I hope that her E-skill damage and her flat damage bonus makes a little bit more sense than when you first started watching this video. And hey, if it did, maybe that deserves a like or maybe even a subscribe to the channel. Alright, well, I hope that this video helped you out in understanding Shenhe's kit a little bit better, and if it did, definitely drop a like on this video, share it with your friends, and maybe even consider subscribing to my channel. For those of you who are planning to pull for Shenhe, good luck, I will also be pulling for Shenhe, so if you are interested in seeing my reactions and my attempts at pulling for her, then definitely come and join the stream. Links are down below. Anyway guys, I did not go over her constellations in this video, but if you are interested in seeing that and seeing my thoughts on how they work, then definitely leave a comment down below. Leaving a like will also let me know that you guys want to see that. So anyway guys, if you made it this far, thank you so much, and until next time, I will see you guys later.